Good afternoon, everyone. It is Sunday, October the 4th, 2020. It is currently 4:39 p.m. Central Time. I'm coming to you live from Victory Baptist Church, and I hope you're ready for a little church history. We're going to do a little church history study this afternoon, and I hope you're ready for that. I hope you love studying church history. If you missed part one of this, you need to go back and find it. You need to go back and listen to it because I'm going to give you a quick review, but you definitely need to hear everything I said. I said a lot about the importance of studying church history, why you need to be studying church history, feeling sorry for you that if your church doesn't study church history, but you as a Christian, you do not want to be ignorant of the history of Christianity. And I hope that you will go back and listen to part one. Now, in part one, it was kind of an introduction to what we're doing. We got a little ways into the subject. What we're really doing is we're tracing the origins of Christian fundamentalism, at least Christian fundamentalism as we understand it in a more modern context, okay? And fundamentalism is defined as this, and this is some review here. All right. Fundamentalism is defined as this: a form of a religion, especially Islam or Protestant Christianity, that upholds belief in the strict, literal interpretation of Scripture, strict adherence to the basic principles of any subject or discipline. So, fundamentalism, the term, carries all kinds of images and ideas. It carries a lot of stereotypes. Now, there is obviously in many cases legitimate reasons those stereotypes exist, but I want to just throw out all of those ideas that when you hear fundamentalist, a fundamentalist Baptist, an independent fundamentalist, however you've heard the term, throw out all the images that come to mind. There may be some truth to those images, but we need to get back to really understanding the term fundamentalism. Simply put, fundamentalism is a strict adherence to the basic principles of any subject or discipline. So in other words, what a fundamentalist is someone who holds to the basic principles, the basic tenets of Christianity, going, these are the basic principles, and if you reject that, that's not Christianity. That's not Christianity. So it really comes down to how one defines what Christianity is. And we talked a lot about that in part one. But I just want to make it very clear. Anyone who says, here are the basic principles, you must adhere to that, that's really a fundamentalist. And they fight for those principles, and they fight for people to adhere to those principles, and they reject those who reject those principles. Now, with that in mind, with that very simplistic understanding of fundamentalism, well, you can really go back to the early church. Read any of the 7 ecumenical councils and all the documents that were produced from those councils. What do you get? Believe that if you do this, you are anathema. If you believe this, you are anathema. If you reject this, you are anathema. They were saying, here are the things you have to believe. Look, think of it this way. The creedal statements released in early church history. The Apostles' Creed, right? That was considered a baptismal creed according to most historical studies. In other words, if you don't recite that creed, well, you can't be baptized because these are the basic elements of Christianity. You either believe that, and if you don't, that's not Christianity. The Nicene Creed, the Athanasian Creed, these are the creedal statements you had to hold to. The early church, here is how we define Christianity. Here are the basic principles. Any deviation, you are anathema. That's fundamentalism. You can go all day saying that it isn't, but that's fundamental. So I will say Christianity is a history of a fundamentalist mindset, right? That this is the truth. We're going to fight for this truth, and we're going to condemn anything that deviates from said truth. That, if you keep that in mind, that begins to get away from all of the other things that supposedly make up a fundamentalist. No, these are someone who fights for the basic tenets of Christianity. All right, keep that in mind. All right, so we talked about a definition. We traced and began to try to trace the origins of the modern day fundamentalist movement as it was defined and named, and kind of started being called fundamentalist, and people started embracing that idea. No, I'm a fundamentalist. We are a fundamental Baptist church. We're an independent They started embracing those names. You really have to go back to the 19th century. And we reviewed, and I'm reviewing this. In the last episode, we talked about how the 19th century, just in case you don't know, it began on January the 1st, 1801, and it ended on December 31st, 1900. So it goes from 1801 to 1900. And during that time, you had an explosion of apostasy. All right, here are some of the things that came in: German higher critical thinking, theological liberalism, humanism, Darwinian evolution, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormonism, and then at the very end of the century, someone by the name of Charles Fox Parham, that is spelled Parham, Parham. He lived from 1873 to 1929. He basically becomes the founder of the Pentecostal charismatic movement, which I believe is a cancer and as I believe it's heretical. I believe it's done so much damage to Christianity. All of this begins to happen right there in the 19th century, starting at the beginning of the century, all the way to the very end. Now, really, the Pentecostal charismatic movement really has its explosion at the beginning of the 20th century, but you get the idea. You get the idea of all of these things were percolating and developing and evolving and moving forward. And this creates an environment. I want to make sure you realize this. The modern day fundamentalist movement was birthed in the midst of a time of great apostasy. All right? And I want you to keep that in mind. Now, we really focused in on some specifics. All right? Let me give you some specifics of the things that were really happening. All right? Here are the things I really want you to focus on. First, we had a revival of Roman Catholicism. Roman Catholicism began to spread, began to grow in the United States of America, and this was a major situation. It was in 1870 that the Pope at that time summoned the First Vatican Council. Vatican I occurs. This is a kind of a resurgence. Some may even say a revival of Roman Catholicism, especially here in the United States of America and other parts of the world. You have to realize this is happening. Now, why? Well, if Roman Catholicism says, no, here are the basic tenets. This is what Christianity is. And if you are not a Catholic and you're a Protestant, you're like, no, here are the principles of Christianity. Well, you're going to find yourself in a fight. And both are fighting for what? So both, in many cases, like sometimes Catholics will refer to Protestant, fundamentalist. Well, you're a fundamentalist too, because you say, here are the basic principles. And if you don't believe them, you are anathema. That's a fundamentalist, right? But the Protestant Christian fundamentalist movement begins to emerge in all of this apostasy and in the middle of a revival of Roman Catholicism. Next was Marxism began to spread. All right? And then here's the one I really want you to focus on: theological liberalism. Theological liberalism was exploding, and this was going to lead. This theological liberalism, I will say, is the primary thing that leads to the birth of the more modern day Christian Protestant fundamentalist movement. Right? And here's what happens. You had German rationalism and theological liberalism was beginning to permeate Protestant denominations in England and America. I want you to see that. This begins to permeate through Protestant denominations, through seminaries, through Bible colleges. And there are those inside Christianity go, no, I can't be a part of a denomination that is now being infiltrated by German rationalism and theological liberalism. We're gonna pull out. We're gonna pull out of these denominations. No, we're not gonna send anyone to those seminaries. We're gonna tell all of our church members, don't go to those seminaries. And those who pull out, those who fight against these things, the revival of Roman Catholicism, Marxism, all of these different things, all of these apostasies, German rationalism, theological liberalism, that is going to be the birth of the modern day fundamentalist movement. They are fighting against these things. They were not going to tolerate it. They were not going to say, we're going to get along. So we're going to go along to get along. They're like, we don't care if we get along. We're not going to go along. We're going to fight against it because they're violating the basic principles of Christianity. Now, two prominent names that come from this German rationalism and theological liberalism. The first one we talked about in great detail at the end of our last session, our last episode, was Friedrich Schleiermacher. All right, Friedrich Schleiermacher. He lived from 1768 to 1834, And we're not going to go back through everything he taught. You can go back and listen. It's Friedrich Schleiermacher. I'm hoping I'm saying his name right. Schleiermacher. Yeah, it has to be. And you can go back. You need to make sure you know exactly what he began to promote. Because so much of what he began to promote, his ideology, his philosophy, really becomes the bedrock, becomes the foundation for the modern evangelical movement. Modern evangelical Christianity has a lot. They owe a lot to Friedrich Schleiermacher, and the fundamentalists were like, no, that's not biblical Christianity. But another person emerges on the scene. Julius Wellhausen. Julius Wellhausen. Wellhausen is spelled Wellhausen. Julius Wellhausen. All right, or Wellhausen. I think I've heard it pronounced that way as well. Julius Wellhausen or Wellhausen. All right. Now, he lived from 1844 to 1918. 1844 to 1918. Julius, Julius, Julius Wellhausen, Wellhausen, Wellhausen. 1844 to 1918. He is the father of the documentary theory of the Old Testament. He is the father of the documentary theory of the Old Testament. Let me read that. I want to make sure you have that down. He is the father of the documentary theory of the Old Testament. All right. His work is also called higher criticism. All right. Higher criticism is sometimes what his work is referred to as. Wellhausen built on the teaching of Karl Heinrich, a student of the German philosopher Hegel, who applied an evolutionary theory to the development of the Bible. So this documentary theory of the Old Testament basically begins to kind of come up with an evolutionary theory of how we got the Bible, how the Bible was developed. All right. And here's the key. He's going to go against the clear teaching that the Bible is the inspired word of God. He's going to come up with kind of a developmental evolutionary theory of how the Bible ultimately originates, how it ultimately shows up in the form that it does. All right. He published a book in 1878. And let me look here real quick. 1878, he published a book. And let me listen here.
Prolegomenon.
Yeah, prolegomenon. Prolegomenon is a very important word to understand this. Prolegomenon. Now, prolegomenon is a critical or discursive introduction to a book. All right. Prolegomenon is a key word here to understanding the book he writes in 1870. Prolegomenon. Prolegomenon. Yeah, that's the right way to pronounce it. Prolegomenon. It's amazing when you look at the word, you can pronounce it. Prolegomenon. He wrote a book called Prolegomena. Prolegomena. All right. Now listen, and I'll give you the full title of the book here in a minute. 1878, Wellhausen, he published a book, Prolegomena, that's Prolegomena, 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 Prolegomenon. Now, what's the difference? Prolegomena, if you look up the word prolegomena, you will find this definition. Prolegomena is an ancient Greek word used to mean prologue or introduction to a larger work. All right? So it's kind of like a prologue, an introduction. So here's the full name of his book. This is very important. In 1878, he published a book, Prolegomena, to the history of ancient Israel. It's an introduction to the history of ancient Israel. It's a prologue to the history of ancient Israel. Prolegomena, all right? 1878. I know I had to spend a lot of time making sure you understand prolegomenon, prolegomena, because they sound, there's a similarity between the two. I want you to just know these words. I want you to understand. I don't want to just throw out a title and then you're sitting there going, I wonder what that word means. That's why I'm trying to explain it, all right? So prolegomena, to the history of ancient Israel, written in 1878. 1878, right there, 19th century. We got all this craziness going on. Okay, just make sure. I hate teaching church history this way because I'm used to teaching it in front of people, so I can see them writing it down. They can say, "Hey, can you spell that again? Hey, I don't understand. What's the difference? Prolegomenon, prolegomena," and then I can clarify. I don't have the ability. You have the ability to contact me though. newsif@yahoo.com. newsif@yahoo.com, and I'll be more than happy to try to help you out here, all right? So, 1878, he wrote a book called Prolegomena to the History of Ancient Israel, which had a powerful influence in the spread of the documentary theory, all right? Now, I know you're still asking, what's the documentary theory? We're going to get to that. Just please note, he's going to give a view of how the Bible basically came about. It's going to go against the idea that it was the inspired word of God. Just stay with me, all right? So he begins to spread the documentary theory. According to this view, here we go, the Old Testament is not divine revelation, but merely the record of the evolution of Israel's religion. That the Bible is not divine revelation, it contains to us the evolution of the religion of ancient Israel. Now, if you have ever watched a documentary, maybe from the Discovery Channel or the History Channel, and they talk about the Bible, if you cannot detect the documentary theory and some of the things they say, well, you need to know a little bit more about the documentary theory because you can hear it. Because I've heard it multiple times and I'm like, oh, that's the documentary theory. There's the documentary there's the documentary theory. But yet, a lot of Christians that don't study church history, they have no clue what the documentary theory is. There's Christians don't have a clue who Frederick Schleiermacher is, and they don't understand his theories. And even though those theories and those ideas are showing up in their church, right? So again, according to this view, the Old Testament is not divine revelation, but merely the record of the evolution of Israel's religion. Much of the Pentateuch, according to this view, is considered sacred legend. Wellhausen held that Hebrew religion had undergone a development from the primitive stories of nomadic times to the elaborate institutionalized ritualism of the period of the centuries before the birth of Christ. Wellhausen denied the historicity of Abraham, Noah, and other Old Testament characters. In other words, they weren't historical, actual people. He goes after Abraham, Noah, and other Old Testament characters. He wrote, from the patriarchal narratives, it is impossible to obtain any historical information with regards to the patriarchs. He claimed that Israel did not know about Jehovah God until Moses taught them this. He claimed that the laws and the priestly system were not given by Moses, but were developed after Israel was in Canaan, and in some cases, after the Babylonian exile, and that most of the Pentateuch was written during the days of Israel's kings as a pious fraud to encourage a revival. Now, I want you to listen to me. This is very important. You got to listen to what I'm about to say. You hear all of that, and you may go, well, who cares? Just some whacked out guy, doesn't matter. Here's what you have to understand about the 19th century. These views started showing up in seminaries, started showing up in Bible colleges, then started showing up in pulpits of major Protestant denominations. And there were plenty of men who were like, no, not going to tolerate this. We're leaving. And they pulled out. That's how you get it. So you may just view it like just some whacked out people who came into the church and started influencing those who were learning or who were training to become ministers. All right? Cannot stress that enough. These are all the things that were being taught. All right? According to him, according to him, most of the Pentateuch was written during the days of Israel's kings as a pious fraud to encourage a revival. So the first 5 books, not written by Moses, written much later during the time of Israel's kings, right? And it was done as a pious fraud to try to create a revival. That's a major claim. That destroys it being the inspired word of God. That destroys how you preach it, how you teach it, and how you live according to it. According to this view, it was the Pentateuch was pieced together from writings by unknown men. Now, Wellhausen also claimed that the Gospels portray a mythical Jesus created by the writers of the New Testament. So you can't even trust the Gospels. The letters J, E, D, P were used to summarize the theory that J stands for Jehovah, E for Elohist, D for Deuteronomy, and P for the priest's code. These are the supposedly different streams of documents that were used to create the Pentateuch over a long period of time. So there was all these documents that go from different streams, right? And you either you give it a J for the Jehovah stream. It came from the Elohist stream. It came from the Deuteronomy stream. It came from the priest's code stream. And they were all pieced together to give us the Pentateuch. This theory has, in its ever-changing forms, wielded vast influence in theological education and in most denominations. Please note, it began to infiltrate the church. Now, there are some who just go along to get along. They're godly. We're godly. We're all on the same page. We're all going to get along. And there are others absolutely not. Going to fight. Going to leave. Going to pull up. We're not going to stand for this. As one generation of students passed into the next, the teachings of Wellhausen became established dogma, and the result was growing disbelief not only in the book of Genesis, but in the entire Old Testament. The number of supposed sources, this is crazy, the number of supposed sources for the Pentateuch multiplied until eventually Wellhausen claimed that he could discern 22 different authors for the first 6 books of the Bible. That there were 22 different authors for the first 6 books of the Bible. And so I could go on and on and on and read about all the things that happen, but you have all kinds of things that start being developed here, and they begin. There was something called the Polychrome Bible. I'll go ahead and give you some information about this. The Polychrome Bible, that's Poly, P-O-L-Y, Chrome, C-H-R-O-M-E. Polychrome Bible was published in 1893. 1893. The critics had developed the most amazing ability to discern even tiny portions of original documents that were allegedly spliced together to form the early books of Scripture. The authors of the Polychrome Bible included Wellhausen, and it gives some other names here, and other influential individuals. The Polychrome Bible was color-coded to identify the alleged source documents. Consider the Polychrome edition of the book of Judges. He claimed that the verses that form Judges chapter 2, verse 6, to Judges chapter 3, verse 6, so Judges 2:6 to 3:6, are made up of 23 different fragments, all spliced together. In 13 cases, he claims to show that 3 words are from one author, while the context is from another author. In 10 cases, he claims that 2 words are from one author and the context from another. And in 8 cases, he would have us believe that one single word is from one author and the context from another one and from another. One of those words being the personal pronoun I. So, hey, I, that's from one author, but the rest, that's from different authors. Now, again, this is just, you say, well, these claims seem insane. They may seem insane, but people sitting in a classroom may start thinking, oh, okay, this is crazy. And begin to question and doubt the trustworthiness of the Bible. And it means they're going to teach the Bible in a completely, radically different way. All right? So there's Wellhausen. Now, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to just list these quickly. 9 characteristics of the theological modernism that was present at that time. All right? These are the things that kind of was birthed in the 19th century. These are the characteristics of theological modernism. And let me make it clear. Theological modernism, the German rationalism, all of these things happening, this was infiltrating the church. Now, you had some of the things that were outside of the church, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormonism. Some of these things were outside, but they begin to have major influence. All of these other things begin to have major influence on the church. Evolution, the doctrine of evolution began to infiltrate the church. Theistic evolution, all these things were infiltrating the church and seminaries. And there were people like, we're not going to tolerate this. We're done. We're going to fight this. We're going to take a stand against it. And that's why they pulled out of those denominations. They left those denominations. That's why they formed independent churches. Independent churches, because they felt they couldn't trust the major denominations. We see that today with a lot of discussion, a lot of fighting right now going on in the Southern Baptist Convention with how, you got Beth Moore, you got women preaching, like what's going on there. You got critical race theory. You got some of the social justice ideas. And a lot of people are like, what, the Southern Baptist Convention is in trouble. The Southern Baptist Convention has been in trouble for a long time. So now people are like, we're going to leave. Well, why didn't you leave a long time ago? These denominations, and many of them have had all kinds of corruption in them for a very long time. And they're only going to get worse. Now, just make sure we realize a local church can become corrupt just as much as a denomination. But here are the 9 major characteristics of the theological modernism that birthed the area. That was birthed in that era, I should say, not area, in that era. All right, here we go. Number 1, a rejection of the historic Christian doctrine of biblical inspiration. So here's what happens. Within Christianity, you start having seminaries, preachers, teachers who begin to reject the doctrine of biblical inspiration. They stop believing the Bible is the inspired word of God. That's number 1. Number 2, a tolerance of views that come from within the religious community. So first you have a rejection of biblical inspiration, but then, this is so key, it's a tolerance. Hey, let's not fight. Hey, you're a Christian worker. It doesn't matter that we completely disagree. Let's just get along. We don't need to argue, fight. I mean, we don't want the church to be divided. We don't want the body of Christ to be divided. Come on, let's be friendly. Let's be tolerant. Let's not be fighting. And this is very important because the fundamentalists become labeled as the fighting fundies, the fighting fundamentalist. Why? Because they're not going to tolerate it. They're going to this is complete and utter heresy. This is apostasy. We got to fight against it. But please note, let me make it very clear. The fighting fundamentalist mentality did not start in the 19th century. Go back to the early church. Those who fought all of the ancient heresies, fighting Arius, Pelagius, you can go through all the heretics that were condemned as heretics. They didn't go along to get along. If they would have if the early church would have gone along to get along, right? Went along to get along, however you want to phrase it. If they would have embraced that idea, Christianity as you know it wouldn't even exist. It would have fallen to compromise. When you compromise with heresy, heresy ultimately becomes the dogmatic teaching. Listen, any compromise with heresy wins out. Compromising with heresy is like compromising with cancer. Let me make it very clear. If you compromise with cancer in your body, the next thing you know, it begins to spread. I'll give you, my brother just had surgery to remove his kidney, and they needed to get it out because of cancer. All right? Now, they believe all the cancer was self-contained in the kidney, and they removed it and got it out. That's going drastic. Cut you open and remove your kidney because you don't let cancer spread. Well, you can't just say, well, we're going to get along. If you go along to get along with heresy, the heresy won't leave it alone. Okay, they're going to move. It's going to spread. It's going to be a cancer. Next thing you know, the heresy, they take over. The heresy dominates. All right. So here are the 9 characteristics of the theological modernism: a rejection of the biblical doctrine of inspiration, a tolerance of views that come from within the religious community. Hey, look, they're Christians. And just think of it. The local Christian bookstore, that's really what they are. And we'll tolerate any view. Doesn't matter what your doctrine or theology is. Now, I understand they're a bookstore, but that mentality creeps into the church. They're Christians. No, they're heretics. That's apostate Christianity. And to say that then makes you a fundamentalist. Number 3, an emphasis upon the validity of human experience over the revealed truth of God. An emphasis upon the validity of human experience over the revealed truth of God. This is straight up in the charismatic one. I experienced it. If I experienced it, it has to be true. I had this experience, has to be true. No, you judge your experience according to the Word of God. You don't judge the Word of God based on your experience. You don't make the Word of God accept your experience. All right? So this emphasizes the validity of human experience over the revealed truth of God. You could state it another way. It emphasizes feelings and emotions and desires and perceived self-needs over the revealed truth of God's Word. Number 4, a denial of the absolute and unique deity of Christ. And a denial of the absolute and unique deity of Christ. Let's go through these again. Number 1. All right, I'm trying to hurry as fast as I can. Number 1, a rejection of the historic Christian doctrine of biblical inspiration. Number 2, a tolerance of all views that come from within the religious community. Number 3, an emphasis upon the validity of human experience over the revealed truth of God. Number 4, a denial of the absolute and unique deity of Christ. Number 5, an emphasis on the dignity and goodness of man. They begin to emphasize the dignity and goodness of man. Now you're bringing in some Pelagius views. You're all kinds of problems. Number 6, a rejection of the total depravity of man and the necessity of the new birth. So they emphasize the dignity and goodness of man. They reject total depravity of man. They reject the total depravity of man. Now, I will argue many within the modern day fundamentalist movement, they too reject the depravity of man while claiming they believe it, but that's a whole different story. Look, those who are not reformed, they reject the total depravity of man, no matter how much they want to claim all day they believe in it, because they don't. Because they believe, well, you're totally depraved, but your will is not depraved. Your will is not depraved. And that's a whole different subject, but okay. We can go to the canons of Dort and restudy that again, but that's a whole different subject, all right? So please note, they emphasize the dignity and goodness of man. They reject total depravity and the resultant necessity of the new birth. You don't have to be born again. See, born again, that's a fundamentalist view. No, we would believe that's a biblical view. Number 7, an evolutionary concept of the origin of all things as opposed to the creationist view. Theistic evolution becomes now involved. Now, why? Well, if you're going to reject the inspired Word of God, if you're going to reject the doctrine of inspiration, then why would you hold to the doctrine of biblical creation? Now you're going to bring in theistic evolution. Number 8, a rejection of the supernatural interventions of God in human history. A rejection of the supernatural interventions of God in human history. When they see the miracles in the Bible, they try to find some kind of scientific explanation. They try to explain away the miracles as not being actual miracles. And this happens sometimes if you watch a documentary on the Discovery Channel or the History Channel. Well, the way that happened was because of this, or maybe Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed because it was an explosion of a volcano, not that it was God raining down fire and brimstone. You get the idea. And then number 9, an emphasis upon the social gospel, that is, that the main mission of the church is to correct societal ills. Sin is essentially social, and thus salvation must involve the correction of those social problems. Do we not see that in the church today? So it's a social gospel. The main mission of the church is to correct societal ills. Hey, look at what's happening in the world. Look what's going on in the world. Look, we've got to fix those problems. No, the church is saying, no, the problem is sin. We've got to call people to repentance and to be born again and to believe in the gospel. We don't look to fix societal ills through political solutions. No, that's a part of what happened in the 19th century. Right? So those are the nine marks, 9 characteristics of the theological modernism that was birthed in that era, right? In that 19th century. These 9 things are going to be the very things that the fundamentalists are going to be like, get that out. We don't want that in our church. Get it out. We don't want to be a part of a denomination where these things are present. We don't want to be in a Bible college or a Bible seminary. We're going to pull everyone out of the seminary. We'll create our own Bible institutes. And that which becomes a hallmark of the fundamentalist movement. Again, let's go through these 9 one more time. Number 1, a rejection of the historic Christian doctrine of biblical inspiration, I should say. They begin to reject the doctrine of biblical inspiration. They reject the doctrine of biblical inspiration. Number 2, they begin to accept a tolerance of views that come from within the religious community. Hey, other Christians believe that. We're not going to argue with it. We may not agree, but we're not going to fight it. Number 3, an emphasis upon the validity of human experience over the revealed truth of God. I will state it this way. They begin to emphasize the validity of human experience and human feelings and emotions over the revealed truth of God. If your emotions if you don't like how that scripture makes you feel, then just reject that scripture. Come up with a new interpretation of said scripture. Number 4, a denial of the absolute and unique deity of Christ. And this will include a rejection of the virgin birth. All right, you can throw that in there if you want. A denial of the absolute and unique deity of Christ. Number 5, an emphasis on the dignity and goodness of man. Number 6, a rejection of total depravity and a rejection of the necessity of the new birth. Number 7, an evolutionary concept of the origins of all things as opposed to a creationist view. Number 8, a rejection of the supernatural interventions of God in human history. And number 9, an emphasis upon the social gospel. That is, that the main mission of the church is to correct societal ills. Sin is essentially social, and the salvation must involve the correction of those social problems. And we would say, no. We don't try to fix the social problems. The sinner needs to, quote unquote, be born again. And when they are regenerated and changed, then as people become Christians, societal issues are changed through the change of people through salvation. But those things start forming. They start becoming the characteristics of Christianity in the 19th century. And those who reject it and pull out of the institutions, start forming independent churches, start forming Bible institutes to get their people out of those seminaries, leaving those denominations, they become the fundamentalist. And they're going to say, here are the fundamentals that you have to believe in. And we'll try to get to that in our next session, or next episode, I should say. All right, I'll stop right there. If you have any questions, email me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. There's a little church history for your Sunday afternoon. All right? Let me know what you think. Let me know if you're helpful. Brenda left a comment under episode 1, part 1 of this. Thank you very much. That was encouraging. That motivated me to do part 2. So always remember, your comments are very encouraging and motivational. So thank you very much for taking time to do that. All right. I'll stop right there. I think that gives us that lays a pretty good groundwork for where we're going. All right. Everyone have a great day. God bless.